The morning Clifton Hale walked into the Varden Industries board meeting, with his 7-year-old daughter Penny beside him, he already knew it was going to go wrong. He hadn't planned to bring her. The sitter had cancelled at 6:15, 20 minutes before he needed to leave, and his daughter had looked up at him from the kitchen table, with cereal still on her chin, and said, "Is it okay, Dad? I can be quiet." He had believed her, because she almost always was. Penny sat in the hallway outside the conference room on a wooden bench, her backpack in her lap, a library book open across her knees. She was reading about ocean animals. She had been on a phase with ocean animals for 3 weeks. Clifton had bought her 2 books, printed 2 more from the library, and let her watch a documentary on a Tuesday night, even though it was a school night, because she had asked so seriously and so politely that he couldn't find a reason to say no. He went into the meeting with his folder of numbers, and his 4 years of distribution records, and his proposal for renegotiating the freight contract that had been quietly hemorrhaging money from Varden's Eastern logistics chain for 2 years, before anyone above him had noticed. He had noticed. He had flagged it in a memo 14 months ago. The memo had been acknowledged and filed. Inside the room, 6 people sat around an oval table. At the far end was Renata Voss, 44, the executive director Varden's parent company, had installed 8 months ago after the merger. She had come from a consulting background. She wore her hair pulled back tight, and she had a way of looking at people that made them feel like they were being evaluated for replacement. Clifton Hale was 38 years old. He had worked logistics for Varden for 11 years, starting in the loading dock, working his way up to regional operations manager for the Eastern Seaboard. He knew every carrier, every seasonal delay, every small town depot that added half a day to delivery windows in the winter. He had never once missed a quarterly target. Renata let him get through 7 minutes of his presentation before she interrupted. "Mr. Hale," she said, "this is a thorough report. I appreciate the detail." She set down her pen. "But we've already contracted with Meridian Logistics for the Eastern chain. The transition begins in 6 weeks. Clifton stopped. "I wasn't notified of that. The decision was finalized last Thursday. You'll receive the formal communication this week." He looked around the table. A few people found reasons to look at their phones. One man, whom Clifton recognized from corporate strategy, was writing something in a notebook with great focus. "Meridian doesn't have the regional infrastructure for winter delivery in the upper Northeast," Clifton said. "They'll miss windows in Vermont and Maine every February. We've had that problem before. That's what my original memo addressed." Renata looked at him with an expression of patient finality. "We're confident in the transition." He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "What does this mean for my position?" She paused. It was the kind of pause that meant the answer was already decided and she was choosing her words. "Varden is restructuring the operations team. Your role as regional manager will be eliminated. We're offering a severance package consistent with your tenure." She slid a sealed envelope across the table. "You're welcome to take time to review it." Clifton did not pick up the envelope. He thought about Penny in the hallway, reading about ocean animals. He thought about his mortgage, which was manageable. He thought about the savings account that was not as large as it should have been, because his wife Diane had gotten sick 4 years ago, and sick had meant 3 years of treatments and adjustments, and then, finally, a kind of stillness that had settled over everything. He was alone with a 7-year-old daughter and a house and a job he had given 11 years to. And, in the time it took a woman he had never met before 8 months ago to say 14 sentences, the job was gone. "You've been a dedicated employee," Renata said. "This isn't a reflection of your performance." He picked up the envelope. When he walked out into the hallway, Penny looked up from her book. She had gotten to the part about deep-sea fish, the ones that made their own light in the dark. She had a finger on the page to hold her place. "How did it go, Dad?" "It went okay," he said. "Let's get you to school." He did not tell her the truth until that weekend. He made pancakes on Saturday morning and sat down across from her, and said that his job was changing, and he was going to find something new. Penny listened with the seriousness she brought to most things. Then she asked if they would have to move. He said he didn't think so. She nodded and went back to her pancakes and said she hoped he found something good. He did not find something good. Not for 4 months. He applied to 14 logistics positions. He got 3 interviews. He got no offers. The industry had consolidated. Companies were contracting out, not hiring in. Every hiring manager he talked to said some version of the same thing, which was that his experience was impressive, but the role had been restructured, or the budget had shifted, or they were moving in a different direction. He understood that the real message underneath each of those phrases was the same. We found someone cheaper. He drove Penny to school each morning and picked her up each afternoon. He made dinner. He helped with homework, which was mostly spelling and basic math, things he was confident about. He sat with her while she read. He let her put ocean animal stickers on the refrigerator, even though there were now 11 of them, and they were beginning to take over a substantial portion of the door. At night, after she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and his coffee, and he searched. It was in the 4th month, on a Tuesday night in February, that he found the listing. It wasn't a job listing. It was a property listing. A commercial warehouse on the edge of Dunmore, a small industrial town 40 minutes southeast of where he lived. The building was listed as distressed. The photographs showed a concrete structure with a collapsed section of roof on the eastern end, broken loading dock doors, a gravel lot full of weeds pushing up through the cracks. The listing price was low enough that he read it twice to confirm it wasn't a typo. He knew the building. He had shipped through Dunmore for 6 years. The warehouse had belonged to a regional freight company that had gone under in 2019. It had been sitting empty since then. The railroad spur behind it still connected to the main line. The loading bays, even in disrepair, were the right dimensions for the kind of short-haul freight operation he had run in his head 100 times over the years without ever saying it out loud. He closed the laptop. He made himself go to bed. He opened it again at 2 in the morning and looked at the listing for another 40 minutes. He called his brother-in-law, Stuart Oakes, the next morning. Stuart was 45, a general contractor who had spent 20 years building and fixing things in the region, and who had an honest face and an honest way of speaking that Clifton had always trusted. He told Stuart what he was thinking. Stuart was quiet for a moment. "You want to buy a broken warehouse," Stuart said. "I want to look at it. That's not the same as saying no." "No," Clifton agreed. "It's not." They drove out on a Thursday. Stuart walked every corner of the building with a flashlight and a tablet where he took photographs and notes. He poked at the roof supports. He examined the loading dock mechanisms. He walked the railroad spur and counted the rail ties and looked at the grade of the ground. Clifton walked behind him and said almost nothing for 2 hours. On the drive back, Stuart said, "But it's structural, not foundational. Not foundational. Everything underneath is solid. The dock mechanisms are old, but they're the right kind of old. The kind that can be rebuilt instead of replaced. The electrical needs a full strip and redo." He looked at Clifton. "It's a big job. It's not an impossible job." "How much?" Clifton asked. Stuart gave him a number. It was a serious number. It was certain things fell the right way, and certain things didn't fall the wrong way. And if Clifton was willing to spend the next year in a state of sustained financial uncertainty, with a 7-year-old depending on him. He spent 2 weeks thinking about it. He talked to a commercial lender he had met years ago through a freight conference. He talked to 2 small carriers who had mentioned, over the years, that they were frustrated with the warehouse options in the Dunmore corridor. He pulled out his old route maps and his load data from his 11 years at Varden, and he looked at the Eastern logistics chain the way he had always looked at it, not as an abstraction, but as a geography with specific problems that specific solutions could address. Then he made the offer on the warehouse. The first person who told him he was making a mistake was his neighbor, Greta Fahey, a retired school teacher, who sometimes watched Penny after school and who had known Clifton since he and Diane had moved in 12 years ago. Greta said it kindly. She said she worried about him. And sometimes people made large decisions when they were grieving, and sometimes those decisions were the wrong ones. He thanked her. He appreciated her saying it. He did not change his mind. The second person who told him he was making a mistake was a former colleague named Phil Brannigan, who had been in regional logistics for 25 years, and who called Clifton after hearing through the industry grapevine that he was buying the Callaway building. "You're not a business owner," Phil said, without cruelty but without softness either. "You're an operations guy. That's a real skill. It's not the same skill." "I know that," Clifton said. "Do you have anyone who can help you run the business side?" "I'm learning." Phil was quiet for a moment. "The Dunmore corridor is thin. You know that. There's a reason Callaway went under. Callaway went under because their owner pulled capital out for 3 years before the company failed," Clifton said. "The corridor isn't thin. It's underserved." Phil didn't have an answer for that. They talked for a few more minutes and ended the call with genuine warmth, the kind that exists between people who respect each other and disagree. Clifton put the phone down and went to help Penny with her reading assignment, which was about a boy who built a boat and sailed it somewhere. He sat beside her on the couch and listened to her read aloud, and when she stumbled over a word, he waited a beat before offering it, because she usually got there herself if he gave her time. Construction began in March. Stewart brought 2 of his regular crew and a subcontractor for the electrical work. Clifton was there every day that he wasn't handling permits, or talking to lenders, or driving Penny to school, or picking her up, or making dinner, or doing the quiet domestic arithmetic of a single-parent schedule which was constant and had no margins. He learned in those months what it meant to hold 2 things at once. Not theoretically. He had understood it theoretically for years, but in the specific physical sense of standing in a partially rebuilt warehouse at 4 in the afternoon, knowing that he needed to leave in 45 minutes to get his daughter from school, and knowing that the dock door on Bay 3 was going to need a decision today, because the parts supplier needed an answer by end of business. He made the call on Bay 3, got in his car, and was at school with 4 minutes to spare. Penny came out with her backpack on, and her hair slightly escaping from the braid he had done that morning, and a permission slip for a field trip in her hand. She gave him the permission slip immediately, before saying anything else, because she had learned that permission slips had a hierarchy. He signed it against the steering wheel while she buckled her seatbelt and told him about her day. She asked about the warehouse sometimes. He brought her on 2 Saturdays when Stewart's crew wasn't working. She walked through the empty bays in her sneakers and asked careful questions about what the building was going to do. He explained it as simply and honestly as he could. Trucks would come in and drop off freight, and other trucks would pick it up and carry it to its destination, and businesses all over the region would use this building because it was in the right place and it would be run by people who knew how to run it. She nodded at each part of this explanation. On the second Saturday, she asked if she could put 1 ocean animal sticker somewhere in the building. Just one, somewhere it wouldn't be in the way. He let her put it on the inside frame of Bay 2's door. A blue whale, about 3 inches long. He didn't tell her that every time he passed Bay 2 he looked at it. The official opening of Hale Freight Solutions was in September. It was not a grand opening. There was no ribbon. There was a catered lunch from a sandwich shop in Dunmore, and Stewart's crew, and the 2 initial carrier clients who had signed on, and Greta Fahey, who came because Clifton had invited her specifically, and Penny, who wore her good cardigan and ate a sandwich, and sat on an upturned crate and read her book when the adult conversations stopped being interesting. The early months were lean. He knew they would be. He had modeled them. The 2 carrier clients generated enough to cover operating costs and about 60% of debt service. He had reserves for the rest, calculated down to the month. He did not sleep well in October or November. He woke at 3 in the morning sometimes and lay in the dark running numbers. He got up and looked at the spreadsheets. He went back to bed. In December, a regional food distributor called Harwick Supply contacted him. They had been using a third-party warehouse 60 miles north for their lower-tier accounts, and the arrangement was creating delivery delays into the Dunmore and South Corridor areas. They asked if Hale Freight could handle short-haul consolidation for their secondary accounts. He said yes. He was precise about what he could offer, what his current capacity was, and what the timeline for scaling would look like. He did not oversell. Harwick signed a 6-month trial agreement. The trial went well. By February they had extended the agreement. By April they had expanded the scope. A small building materials company followed. Then a regional paper goods distributor. Each one came because the previous one had mentioned him by name. He was never the biggest option. He was never the cheapest. He was reliable in a way that he had spent 11 years learning to be, and in the specific geography of that corridor, reliability was worth more than price, because delays in that part of the eastern chain compounded in ways that cost money downstream. In May, a year and a half after construction had begun and 8 months after opening, he hired his first employee. Her name was Adele Marsh, 31, formerly a scheduling coordinator at a regional trucking company that had folded. She was organized in a way that complemented his organization, which meant they didn't duplicate each other's work, they covered each other's gaps. He hired a second person, 3 months after that, a dock supervisor named Frank Pruitt, who had 20 years of freight experience and opinions about loading sequences that turned out to be correct approximately 90% of the time. He did not think about Renata Voss often. When he did, it was not with anger. It was with a kind of detached recognition, the way you sometimes think about weather that was bad, in a place you no longer live. She had made a decision about the Eastern logistics chain, and the decision had not been made from ignorance of the terrain, but from indifference to it, which was a different thing. Indifference to terrain was expensive over time. He found out through Phil Brannigan, in late spring of the second year, that Varden Industries had been experiencing delivery failures in the Vermont and Maine accounts every winter quarter. Meridian Logistics had not had the infrastructure for it. This was exactly what Clifton had told the board it would say, in 7 minutes of a presentation before he was handed a sealed envelope. Phil called to tell him this, and also to say that a Varden regional operations contact had asked Phil if he knew of any reliable warehouse operations in the Eastern Corridor. Phil had given them Clifton's name. Clifton sat with that for a moment. Then he asked Phil to send over the contact information. The meeting was at a coffee shop in Hartford, not at any office. Renata was there, along with a logistics director named Sutton Walsh, who had joined Varden after Clifton's departure. Walsh was younger, mid-30s, and had the good sense to let Clifton talk without interrupting. Renata recognized him, of course. She showed no discomfort at recognizing him, which he had expected. People who operated at her level were trained to move through awkward situations without acknowledging the awkwardness. He respected that as a professional skill, even as he understood its limitations. He presented what Hale Freight could offer. He was precise. He did not reference their prior meeting. He did not make her uncomfortable. He was there to discuss a business arrangement, and he discussed it. When he was finished, Walsh leaned forward. Your winter delivery record for the South Corridor accounts is better than anything we've seen from a third-party provider in that geography. I know the terrain, Clifton said. Walsh looked at him, and then at Renata. Renata was quiet for a moment. What would a pilot agreement look like? She asked. He had prepared for this question. He gave her an answer. The pilot agreement covered 12 accounts in the Vermont and lower New Hampshire corridor, the exact accounts that had been generating quarterly failure reports. He ran the pilot through one full winter cycle, tracking every delivery window, every weather delay, every adjustment. He sent Varden a monthly performance report. The reports were clear and detailed and showed a delivery completion rate of 96.4% through the 2 worst weather months on record in that region in 5 years. Walsh sent an email in March that said simply, "We'd like to discuss expanding the relationship." They expanded the relationship. By the following fall, Varden was Hale Freight's second largest account. Clifton had a staff of 9. He had converted a second section of the warehouse into temperature-controlled storage to handle a pharmaceutical distributor that had approached him after seeing the Varden results. He was in conversations with a grocery chain about regional consolidation. Stewart came by on a Friday afternoon to look at some structural questions related to the temperature storage conversion, and stayed for a beer afterward, sitting on 2 folding chairs in the cleaned-up office space near Bay 1. Clifton had put a proper desk in there now. There was a whiteboard on the wall, with the week's load schedule written across it. Stewart looked around the space. Diane would have wanted to see this, he said. Yeah, Clifton said. It wasn't a long conversation. Stewart finished his beer and asked about Penny and drove home. Clifton sat for a while after he left, looking at the whiteboard and at the load schedule and at the afternoon light coming through the skylights that they had repaired in the first phase of construction. The ones that Stewart had told him were expensive but worth it. He thought about what Renata had said to him in that board meeting, which was that his role was being eliminated. He thought about the sealed envelope and the walk down the hallway to where his daughter was sitting on a bench reading about deep-sea fish. He did not think of it with bitterness. He thought of it with the particular clarity that comes from having stood at the beginning of a long road and not been able to see the end of it and having walked it anyway. Penny was 9 now. She had moved on from ocean animals to geology, with some residual loyalty to the ocean animals. She had 3 rocks on her windowsill that she had found at a state park and looked up and identified herself. She had explained their geological history to Clifton one Saturday morning, with an accuracy that had surprised him, and a seriousness that had not. She still walked through the warehouse sometimes, on Saturday mornings when it was quiet, before the first trucks arrived. She knew the building now. She knew which dock doors stuck in cold weather, and which bays got morning light, and where the water fountain was, and where Frank kept the extra packing tape. She walked through it with the familiarity of a place that had become part of her understanding of the world. On one of those Saturday mornings she stopped at Bay 2 and looked at the door frame. The sticker was still there. 2 years of warehouse operation had not dislodged it. It had a little wear at one edge, but the blue whale was intact, still making its way across 3 inches of industrial doorframe. You kept it, she said. Of course, he said. She looked at it for another moment. Then she adjusted her backpack on her shoulders and walked on to see if Frank was in yet, because Frank sometimes brought donuts on Saturdays, and she had a system for arriving before the good ones were gone. Clifton stayed at Bay 2 for a moment after she had gone. He looked at the sticker. He looked at the light coming through the loading bay, the particular flat gray light of early morning that made the concrete look silver. The kind of light that had always seemed to him like the world clearing its throat before the day began. He had not saved the warehouse. The warehouse had not saved him. They had simply needed each other at the same time, in the same geography, and they had both turned out to be more solid than anyone had thought to check. He walked out into the lot to wait for the first truck.